Hey people, it's Wall here with Wallcraft. Just working on the Alpha Ironforge map right now. Getting some of the area flagging done, and you can see the different subsections all labeled out. I'm probably going to have to expand the map a little bit on the borders in some areas, but this is Nugget, so in the client you don't really have the same render distance, and very likely for things like the Swamp of Sorrows, I'm just going to block that off with the trees, so as a player you'll be standing right about here, and you really won't see anything past, that certain draw distance. That's pretty far to begin with. Likely I'll have, probably like some of the Plague Land blockades that block off the Ghost Lands in Vanilla, stationed right here. But, as you can see over here, this is what was known as the Grand Hamlet, which later became Darkshire. And because this map is going to be set lore-wise pre-Second War, and it's going to feature the slaying of Medivh. Originally this place was called the Grand Hamlet, and that's before darkness overtook the land, so I have to redo all the buildings and all the whatnots, but you can see the texturing is different. Obviously than normal Duskwood. Down over here would be Stranglethorn Vale. This would actually be Zul'Gurub, which is why in TBC Karazhan, if you manage to get outside the WMO, the tower itself, you can go see the unfinished Zul'Gurub. It's basically just because they ripped the map and some of the buildings were left there. This would be Blasted Lands, which originally was known as the Black Morass. Swamp of Sorrows and Blasted Lands were both known as Black Morass. So like I said, this part's going to be blocked off. You're not going to be able to access that. But originally Deadwind, it was torn open by, lore-wise, this is kind of a retcon by Blizzard. I believe in their comics or novels. But originally it was torn open by an agent of Sargeras. I believe her name was Satiel. And she was essentially given a scythe by Sargeras to kill stuff around here and just rip the whole thing open. It wasn't dead yet, though. It wasn't particularly what would be known as Deadwind Pass. That wasn't until Medivh was slain that darkness overtook the whole land by Karazhan and over in Darkshire. So I'm going to go with the more so akin to the original lore of the place. And this would be mostly featuring Deadwind Pass as a living version of the map before it was totally desecrated. So I decided to opt for a little bit brighter of a color scheme. Obviously this is, a grassy texture. Even the path itself is comprised of grassy texture with some small flowers. If we get really close you can see flowers line the path going all the way up to Karazhan, because this was, a very great magical place, and even though it was a respite for Agwyn and a place for essentially her to hide from the Kirin Tor, this would definitely been a little bit more ambient and bright comparatively to what would be known as Deadwind Pass. So the lore itself in the early history of the area and the early history of Karazhan is very bare bones. So I do have a little bit of creative liberty. Blizzard doesn't really describe, how the place looked around here. So I figured obviously I'd go with something a little bit more lively. And for the scenario, I'm still debating as to whether or not I want to handle it as a raid. That would just be, a traditional 40-man raid. But very likely I will. Very likely, because TBC Kara is already in Wallcraft, it's a 20-man raid. It's not accessible. Well, it is accessible by players, but it's not filled. It's not scripted. It's not a raid yet. It's just a location. TBC, the Kara version, Kara, the TBC version, is going to be a 20-man in Wallcraft. But the original Alpha will either be a 40-man scenario where you go and slay Medivh, and it will be added as a wing to the Caverns of Time. If I opt to go for a little bit different route, though, and I make it an open world raid, then I will likely do a little bit away with the, you know, major scripting, which I'd rather just, you know, keep it with the 40 man. But if I do an open world raid, I would have the entire tower become progressively more and more challenging, requiring more and more players. And I'd really like to experiment with having the final boss, whether it be Medivh, if it's an open world raid, whether the final boss would be Medivh, or something else, you know, perhaps a demon, Sargeras demon, perhaps, even Satiel herself, but that wouldn't really be too lore friendly. What I'd like to do, though, to get to the point, is to possibly have a progressive raid that scales up in difficulty, requiring more and more players for each floor. So it would start with a 40-man tuning, and then it would move up to an 80-man tuning, and then a 120, and then 160, and then 200. And each floor would feature a boss, and perhaps a few sub-bosses on the sides, inside the side pocket rooms, or even just really difficult raid mobs that are scaled per each floor's difficulty. But essentially the final floor would be tuned for a 200-man raid. But 200-man, it's doable in terms of what I can do, but the room wouldn't really complement it. So maybe even perhaps raids that are tuned for 40, 60, 80, and then 100 or 120, depending on the amount of floors that I really decide to include in each group. But that is, like I said, probably unlikely. Very likely I'll just take it with the traditional route of a 40-man raid, and that would honestly be pretty cool, because I considered it whether or not I'd like to have, obviously, 2 Karazhans, but this is a really special thing here. This is the original Alpha Karazhan that's never been seen in-game. The WMO has been completely touched up and refurbished by Ever Jr., and this map is, you know, a custom rendition of Deadwind Pass from the pre-Second War era. And in terms of Blizzard lore, the slaying of Medivh was an amazing event. Now, I'm not a huge lore junkie. I love the lore of the game, but I'm not the resident expert in the department. But if you've never read about it, go read the early history of Karazhan on the wiki. And essentially the slaying of Medivh was facilitated by Anduin Lothar, Garona, and Khadgar. And I would absolutely love an opportunity to bring Anduin Lothar back into the game in some sort of action scenario. So if that were the case, which likely it will be, it'll be Anduin Lothar begins with Garona and Khadgar. They'll all be in the Grand Hamlet, which would obviously later be known as Darkshire. But they would be in the Grand Hamlet. Your raid would zone in, you know, somewhere. And like I said, I'd probably add some more tiles over here, some more ADT tiles, map tiles. But you'd begin somewhere around here, and then you would go talk to them, and then they would begin the long trek over to Karazhan. You'd accompany them along the way. And the pathway there would not really particularly feature encounters, because that's not, you know, the mission here. The mission here is to go slay Medivh in what would relatively be a time of peace, so not a whole, you know, lot of stuff as you fight along the way, but they would, you know, run through the path here, and they'd give you a little bit of lore and have some dialogue, and then once they reach the tower, there would be some guards outside that you would fight as a raid, you know, 40-man raid encounter outside for the front gate here before you can approach. And then each floor, they would accompany you, and they would essentially lead the way through the tower, because this place is an absolutely massive labyrinth. It would start with the basement, where you'd go down there and kill a boss with the 3 of them, and then progressively ascend the tower all the way up until you reach the very top, where you would fight Medivh, where he'd be positioned up on this platform. So a 40-man version of the raid would feature 7 or 8 bosses total. Some pretty tough trash, but the trash wouldn't be densely packed. It would be approximately the same trash that you see in vanilla through Molten Core, BWL. And I'm not referring to the mobs or the tuning, but the density of the mobs. Some just really big behemoth-type mobs that you'd fight. The tower at the time of Medivh's slaying was full of guests. So, I'm sorry, that would be the Agwin encounter. It was full of apparitions, and basically Medivh was losing his grip on reality as Sargeras was taking over. So there would be a lot of demonic type entities floating around, some phantasms, apparitions. Because in the lore, when Agwin confronted Medivh and tried to neutralize him, he, and if I'm wrong about this, correct me in the comments here. But during the encounter between Medivh and his mother Agwin is when he absorbed the life force of all the guests inside the Tower of Karazhan, which is why it's full of ghosts and TVC still. Those are all the people that he killed during that. And again, I can't recall exactly if that was during the Agwin encounter or the Lothar, Khadgar, Garona encounter. But either way, the mobs would be appropriate for that. And I had considered, even instead of the Khadgar, Anduin, and Garona encounter, doing the Agwin encounter. And that's still up in the air. Obviously it's not scripted or no NPCs have been added yet. I'm still working on the map here. You can see, in terms of the map, I've just been mostly doing texturing, painting, fixing all the gaps and stuff. I've added a few objects just for sampling, a little pumpkin patch and some wheat, but other than that, and the building itself, there's no objects on the map currently. For this month's tournament, again, we're going to fight a boss here, so it's just going to be a prototype. I'm going to whip up some sample trash maybe and some bosses. Nothing super special, and definitely won't be final state, but that'll give us something to do while we explore the tower and have some encounters here. As you can see though, if we take a look at the area flagging, we have the entire zone that would be Deadwind Pass. It didn't have a proper name before. It was just known as a beautiful enchanted valley. So I've just labeled it as the Enchanted Valley. Then we have what would be Grand Hamlet over here. Then of course Black Morass would be over here, where the Swamp of Sorrows would later be known as. And Blasted Lands is also labeled as Black Morass. And those areas aren't going to be particularly accessible, and they're going to be blocked off. And you have Karazhan, you have Stranglethorn to the south, and then of course you have this little special graveyard plot here. I'm going to add the family graveyard where Nilas Aran is buried, Medivh's father. So there'll definitely be some cool stuff to explore and do around here. Very, very excited to continue filling out this map and working on it for the next little while. And I know that there's a lot of other stuff that I'd like to accomplish, more spells, more refinements. I still have Frost Mage, Resto Shaman, and Shadow Priest to work on, which I've done a little bit of work over the past week on them, but for now I'm very happy to continue chugging along with this map, because this is going to be the first absolutely unique encounter in Wallcraft, and frankly the first time that anybody's going to ever be exploring and doing anything inside the original Alpha Karazhan, outside of Alpha servers, Grender's in particular server project, which does feature the original Alpha Karazhan and Deadwind Pass, but it's not populated with mobs or anything because Blizzard never finished it, they never filled it. It was, just a placeholder building essentially. So this will be the actual first time that players get to go in there and actually do things. But yeah, that's very exciting. I'm very excited to continue filling this out and making enemies and scripting up cool little things that we can do. Yeah, stay tuned for more. Don't forget to come check this out. Project Wallcraft. It's wallcraft.org. That's where you can find it. It's alpha server is available 24/7 for players to access. You can go and explore the whole game. You can do 1 through 60, or you can grab max gear off the vendor and just go kill people. We usually meet up for duels around 2 p.m. Eastern time every day, and then we'll run some dungeons and whatnot. And then the last Saturday and the last Sunday of the month are the tournaments and the classrooms. So last Saturday of the month, 2 p.m. Eastern time, we're going to go explore this place for this month's tournament. And for the last Sunday is the classroom. That'll be lesson number 5, I believe, and That's going to continue with some of the exploration of the database structures and the tables. Particularly, we're going to be examining the client. And who knows, maybe we'll even get the Classroom to get their own custom MCLQ Nugget fork that TD has made compiled, which allows editing of vanilla maps with vanilla liquids, and has a few nice little tools and features built in. So yeah, don't forget to like, subscribe, click the bell icon, open the envelopes that you get in the mail, throw them right in the trash if they're credit card bills, and come check out Wallcraft.